All right, so here we want to look at multiplying rational expressions. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to factor everything that we can. Some things will already be factored, some things won't be able to be factored. So just if you can, you want to factor, whether it's a numerator, denominator, anything. Once we do that, we want to see if we can cancel out any common factor. So that means any numerator that has a factor with any denominator. It doesn't have to be its own numerator or denominator. It can be any of them in the multiplication. Remember, they have to be exactly the same to be able to cancel. Okay. Once we do that, we're going to multiply whatever's left over straight across. So numerators get multiplied with numerators, denominators with denominators. And then we want to check and make sure that we haven't forgotten to simplify anything. Okay. So in doing all of this, there's a couple different things we're going to have to remember. We're going to have to remember how to factor. And we're going to have to remember how to multiply. When we multiply, remember that if it's just variables, then I have to remember about adding their exponents. If it's, expressions, then I have to remember how to distribute. So let's look at a couple examples to kind of get the hang of it. So remember, the first thing that we want to do is we want to factor everything that I can. The first example, there's nothing to factor. We then want to go ahead and cancel out any factors in any numerator and any denominator. So one thing that I notice is that I've got a 24, which can be divided by an 8. So I can reduce those. So 24 divided by 8 is going to give me a 3. I can also reduce this 5 and this 15 because 5 and 15 can reduce to be also 3. Right? Now let's look at our variables. I've got an x in the numerator and an x in the denominator. Remember, when I'm going to reduce those, when I'm dividing exponents, I'm going to subtract. So I'm going to have 7 minus 5, which is going to leave me with an x squared. All right. Then I have this y cubed and this y squared. Okay. Again, I'm going to subtract. So 3 minus 2 is going to give me a y. So my final answer on this would be 9x squared y. All right. Let's look at another example. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is factor. If I look at the first set here, there's nothing to factor, but the second set, I've got x squared minus 4. I can factor that to be x plus 2 and x minus 2. I can factor it as difference of perfect squares. So I'm going to get rid of my x squared minus 4 and turn it into x plus 2 times x minus 2. All right, so everything is now factored. So now I'm going to see if there's anything to cancel. So I'm going to start off with my constants. I see a 60 and a 12, so those can reduce to be a 5. All right, then I notice that I have a x4 and an x5. I'm going to subtract those, which leaves me with a negative 1. And we'll deal with that in a little bit. So then the last thing that we see is we want to look at our factors here. I've got an x minus 2 and an x minus 2, so I can cross those off. So what I will be left with is that x plus 2. All right, so now we need to see what else we can simplify or multiply across, things like that. So one thing that I notice here is this x negative 1. Remember, negative exponents will go to the denominator. So if I really want to simplify this, I can start by saying 5 parenthesis x plus 2 over x. Remember, this negative 1 will get moved into the denominator. I could keep going one more step and go ahead and distribute here. It's up to you at this point if I want to do that. Okay. So let's look at our next example. the first thing I want to do is I want to factor. So I'm going to factor everything that I can here. I'm going to start off with this denominator, which is going to give me an x minus 5, an x minus 5. I'm going to go to the next numerator, which is going to give me an x minus 5 and an x minus 1. I move to the next denominator. I've got a 2x in common, which will leave me with x minus 1. So I noticed that the first example we didn't have any factoring. The next example we had like one little factoring. And then this next one we've got lots of factoring. So I really have to know how to do all the different types of factoring because I don't know what type each problem is going to call for. All right, so now that I've got everything factored, I'm going to see what I can cancel off. Okay, I'm going to start off again with my numbers. I've got a 10 here and a 2 here. Oh, actually, you know what I want to do? Just so it's not in the way, I'm going to go ahead and cross off the original stuff so all I can see is the factors. Okay, it's a little bit better. So I've got that 10 and that 2. So I can reduce that to be a 5. Okay, then I've got my x cubed and my x, which I can cross those off and get an x squared. All right, now I'm going to go to my factors. I see an x minus 5 and x minus 5. I can only cross off one of those because I only have one in the numerator to cross off with one in the denominator. Okay, then I see an x minus 1 to cross off. So what I'm left with is just this x minus 5, but it is in the denominator. Okay, so when I go back and look at it, there's nothing else to do, so that is my entire answer. All right, let's look at this very last one and see if we can get it. All right, remember the whole idea for all of this stuff that we're doing is to get it to where we can cancel off as much stuff as we can. So I'm going to start off and I'm going to factor. So the first numerator, I'm going to have the difference of perfect squares. I'm going to go ahead and cross that off there. All right, the bottom is already factored. I'm going to go to my next numerator, so I'm going to have x minus 5 and x plus 3. Cross that one off there. The bottom is already factored. Okay. So now what I want to do, there are no numbers or just variables to cross off like in the last ones. So I'm going to move straight on to my factors. So I notice that I've got a 3x plus 5 in the numerator and in the denominator. I've got an x minus 5 in the numerator and the denominator. So that's going to leave me with 3x minus 5 and x plus 3. So I can leave it like this, or I could also go ahead and distribute it out. Doing that, I'd get my 3x squared plus my 9x minus my 5x minus my 15, combine those like terms. So my final answer would be 3x squared plus 4x minus 15. All right. Okay, so hopefully we now kind of have a pretty good idea how we're going to multiply rational expressions. We start out and factor everything that we can. So I really got to know about my factoring. Then I'm going to cancel anything. It could be a factor. It could be a whole number, like constant. It could be a variable with just an exponent. Okay, so I have to know those kind of properties there. Then I'm going to multiply it out. Okay, if there's anything that needs to finish being simplified, like we had that negative exponent that had to move to the bottom, maybe we had some distributing, some combining like terms, okay, that'll finish off my problem.